Okay, we'll go to the slides now, okay? Boom, like magic. There they are. I want to tell you just a brief little story before I start my presentation, and I'm talking today about probably my favorite topic. I talked a little bit about words yesterday, and I want to expand on that a little bit today and to try to help you help kids use, as I said yesterday, build up language instead of put down language. So I want to tell you a little story about words and how they can be interpreted. Last September, my last book came out, and the local newspaper in the county that I live in, it's called San Mateo County, the newspaper contacted me and they said, we want to do a story about you, about your new book. And I said, fine. And they came to my home and they took a picture of me with my new book, and there was a nice article in the paper the next day. And my wife, Kathy, and I went out to dinner that night with some friends of ours, and we met them at the restaurant. And the woman said to me, she says, oh, Hal. She said, I didn't say Hal, remember, I said Hal, H-A-L, that's my name. And she said, you wrote another book. She said, you're in the newspaper again. She said, how does it feel to go from being an unknown public school teacher to a star author? She called me a star. You guys make me feel like a star with all the pictures you've taken of me and so on. But anyway, I said, well, I don't really feel like I'm a star, and I hope I don't act like one. And so we went on with our dinner, and we had a nice time, and then we all left, and we're going home. And I said to my wife, Kathy, I said, hey, that's pretty cool, isn't it? Jeannie, that was the name of the other woman. I said, she thinks I'm a star. Well, you know, wives have a very special way of keeping their husbands in line. And she said, oh, spare me. Okay, and so then we had a conversation about how did the word star start getting used for a celebrity. And I've always very curious about origins of words, and I buy a new dictionary every 2 years because I do so much with words. And I said, well, you know, I just bought the new dictionary. I said, it's still on the kitchen table. When we get home, let's look up the word star and see if we can find a connection there. So and Kathy got into the kitchen first, and so she picked up the dictionary. And she said, she looked up the word star, and she says, you know, there's about 6 different definitions of star. And I said, well, I'm not surprised. And she's looking at them, and she said, I take it all back. She said, you are truly a star. And I go, whoa. You know, and she said, there's a definition here that fits you perfectly. And I thought, this is great. And then I read it, and it said, star, a self-contained mass of gas. Okay. So anyway, I'm not a star. I'm a teacher. And again, I want to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, and it's about the power of words. Okay. Positive words, powerful results. When we're teachers, but anywhere we go. Subtitle, simple ways to honor, affirm, and celebrate life. We can do that with our words. Okay, now, this is a little background. This was my first book. I wrote it in 1990. It was originally called 20 Things I Want My Kids to Know. But so many adults were reading it that my publisher said, let's take kids off the title and change the name a little bit. So they called it Life's Greatest Lessons, 20 Things That Matter. But to me, it will always be 20 things I want my kids to know. It's like a love letter to my 3 sons saying, these are the things I want you to understand about life. Now, in that book, chapter 10 is kind words cost little, but accomplish much. And I knew when I wrote that book that I wanted to write more about this topic. So several years later, after I recovered from writing the first book, and in the meantime I collected a lot of things that I could find about the power of words, I wrote my second book, and I think I showed you this yesterday. In fact, I signed a couple of copies of Life's Greatest Lessons this morning, and I have signed a couple of copies of this book. So some people have it. But again, the same title, Positive Words, Powerful Results, Simple Ways to Honor, Affirm, and Celebrate Life. Now, I want to share with you a little thing that happened between a New York journalist, a magazine reporter, and the greatest historian that ever lived. You may not have ever heard of the historian, but I want to tell you a little bit about him. His name was Will Durant. He died in his late 80s, back in the 1980s. And he is considered probably the most prolific and greatest historian who ever lived. He certainly wrote more history than any other person. He won in the United States the highest award we give for writing is called the Pulitzer Prize. And he won the Pulitzer Prize, and he also won the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the same award that John W. Gardner, who I talked about yesterday, had won. Well, his seminal work is called The Story of Civilization. And he went back, all the way back to the beginning of civilization, and he worked and he worked and he worked and he dedicated his life to telling us the whole story. Now, people ask me often, how long does it take you to write a book? And I say usually about a year, and I think that's 1 year of hard work. It took this man 50 years to write this book. It's about 14 volumes, and then it's the most complete history of civilization ever written. He and his wife, by the way, she wasn't professionally trained as a historian, but she worked with him, and they wrote this incredible book that won all of these awards. Now, there was a young journalist in New York who was given an assignment. And the assignment was write an article about the 10 greatest achievements in the history of the world. Now, wouldn't that be a challenge? The 10 greatest achievements in the history of the world. And he said, I just got out of journalism school. I'm 24 years old. How do I know what the 10 greatest achievements are? And his editor said, this is part of being a journalist. Go out and find some good sources. And so he started asking around, and they said, go to Will Durant. He's the greatest historian who ever lived. He's still around. He's very friendly. He likes to talk to people. And so the guy made a connection with Will Durant. And he said, Dr. Durant, he said, I'm writing an article about the 10 greatest achievements in the history of the human race. And Dr. Durant looked at him and smiled, and he said, boy, he said, that's really quite a challenge they gave you, isn't it? And he said, I was hoping that you would help me. He said, I'd be happy to help you. He said, but you know, there have been so many great achievements in the history of the human race that he said, I would need some time to think about it. I can't answer that off the top of my head. He said, can you give me a few days? And he said, oh, sure, I don't have a deadline until about a week. And he said, okay, let's meet in 3 days back here in this coffee shop. And he said, I'll think about it, and I'll give you my top 10. So they agreed to do that. Now, over the years, I've been asking people, what do you think are the 10 greatest achievements in the history of civilization? Now, these are not Dr. Durant's answers. These are answers of people that I've surveyed all over. And I'm just going to give you some of the examples of answers that I've received. Okay, here are 5 of them. The wheel, the printing press, science, agriculture, education. Those are great achievements. Here are 5 more that I've been giving by many people. Electricity, the automobile, the telephone, the airplane, and then a concept, democracy. In more recent years, human rights, television, computers, the internet, DNA, and the list goes on and on and on. Okay, now, since I was surveying people, I thought I would break it down into men and women, and because I was a high school teacher, I thought I would also ask teenagers. Okay, so I asked the men, what is the number one achievement in the history of civilization? Anybody want to guess what men say is number one? Sports. Now, I don't know if you're as crazy about sports in the Philippines as we are in the United States, but that's all men talk about is sports. So that's their number one, greatest achievement in the history of the human race, sports. But they, almost all of them added something that makes watching sports better. Do you know what it is? Beer. Sports is always better with beer. Okay, now, let's go to the women. You ask 1,000 women in the United States, it's probably the same here. What is the greatest achievement in the history of civilization? Shopping, right? Okay, now, but many of them added something, just like the men added beer. Women said shopping is better without a man. Okay. You know, my wife Kathy, she loves to shop, I think like all women. And do you have Nordstrom in the Philippines? Yes? Well, Nordstrom is a very, very popular store in the United States, and there's a big shopping center near us called Stanford Shopping Center, and there's a huge Nordstrom store, and Kathy goes there a lot. So a couple of years ago, I rewrote my will, and I give instructions on what's going to happen when I die, and I'm going to be cremated, and I want some of my ashes to be sprinkled in Nordstrom. And the reason is because I know that my wife will come and visit me at least once a week. Okay? All right. Now, I would imagine teenagers in the Philippines are not too different than teenagers in the United States, but I spent 36 years with them, so I wanted to survey them too. I didn't want to make them think too much, so I asked them for 5 instead of 10. And I want to give you their answer, what they think are the 5 greatest achievements in the history of the human race. The bed, the television, the cell phone, the car, and the iPod. That's all they need to live a complete life. All right? Okay, now, let's go back to Will Durant, this great historian. He meets back with this young journalist, and he said, this was more challenging than I thought, but I love the challenge and I enjoyed doing this. He said, I call these peaks of progress. He said, every one I'm going to give you is something that led to other things. And they were peaks of progress. They pushed us forward. And he said, the guy had asked him to put them in order of importance. So let me show you 9 of his 10 in order of importance. You may be surprised at some of them. Fire, conquest of the animals, that's not something I ever would have thought of, what an important peak of progress that was. But he said, the animals were way bigger and faster than us. If we didn't learn how to conquer them, we wouldn't be here. There would be no peak of progress. And so these all made sense as he explained them. I hadn't thought of morality, but I was glad he did, especially since I'm in character education. He has tools, science, education, writing, and print. So these are 9 of the top 10. Now I'm here to talk about the power of words. What am I doing talking about the greatest achievements? Let's see what this fabulous historian says was the greatest achievement in the history of the human race: speech. It is something we take for granted. And he said it is the greatest peak of progress and there will never be anything to match it. He said, had we not developed languages and had we not developed the ability to communicate with each other quickly, he said, we would never have been able to make the progress that we have, because we can't do anything by ourselves. We must do it with other people and be able to communicate. It's like Dr. Jones and myself, we're using words, we're trying to communicate the best we can with ideas that will help you become better teachers. Hopefully we're making progress through the power of speech. So that's what he said was number one, and I have great respect for this conclusion that he made. Stuart Chase was a great scholar of the 1940s and the 1950s, and I think this is a wonderful quotation to remind us how we take words for granted. We live in an ocean of words. We do. But like the fish in water, we are often not aware of it. We begin understanding words when we're less than 1 year old. We begin saying words when we're less than 2 years old, and then we go on and talk for the rest of our lives, and we sometimes aren't aware of the power that our words can have. Now, I'm throwing this in there just because I thought you might be interested in it. How many words does a person speak in an average day? This has been researched very thoroughly, and you may be surprised how many words the average person speaks. Okay, research tells us that the average male speaks 6,073 words per day. Okay, now is it true? I always hear people say women talk more than men. Is that true? Okay, it is. Women speak 8,805 words. Okay, that's the average. But that's a lot of words, whether you're a man or a woman. You probably didn't think you used that many words in a day. Okay, again, this is just a reinforcement. I'm not going backwards. We live in an ocean of words, but like the fish in water, we are often not aware of it. And my job with kids is that they were very unaware of the power that their words could have, and I wanted to teach them. Again, the key here is to use build-up language instead of tear-down language. Okay, now, I like to quote people, as I did yesterday. I gave you 6 quotations about character education, and now I want to give you 6 quotations by famous people throughout history on the power of words. And I'm going to do it historically. I'm going to go back 3,000 years for the first person, and I think everybody in this room has heard of him. King Solomon. The Bible tells us that he was the wisest man that ever lived, that God asked him what he wanted, and he said, I want wisdom. And he said, you will be the wisest person that's ever lived, and no one will be as wise after you. So I have a great respect for Solomon, and I've read the Proverbs many times and still look at them every once in a while. Well, in his Proverbs, there are 50 places, 50 places where he talks about the power of words. Here's one of them. The instruments of both life and death are contained within the power of the tongue. Words have started wars. Words have caused people to be killed, death. But words have also brought peace, life. But they do that. Another one from Solomon. Reckless words pierce like a sword, but the tongue of the wise bring healing. And I want to teach that to our kids, and I want to teach it to teachers also. Our words are very powerful. We have choices. Do we want our words to pierce like a sword, or do we want them to bring healing? King Solomon again, a word aptly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. Okay, now let's come history. Let's move along. I think one of the wisest men that ever lived was Buddha. I love reading the things that he has said. I've quoted him many times. And this is really the theme of my talk this morning. Words have the power to destroy or heal. When words are both true and kind, they can change our world. I'm going to tell you a brief story this morning about one of the greatest people I've ever met. And his words were true and kind, and he changed my life. And that's one of the reasons that I'm talking about this today. St. Paul, in the New Testament of the Bible, 2,000 years ago, he said, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs." Again, building others up instead of tearing others down, that it may benefit those who listen. If you're wondering precisely where that is, it's in Paul's letter to the Ephesians. And I wish I could give you the exact citation right now. I sometimes carry it in my head, but I'm blanking on it right now. But it is in Ephesians, and I know you could find it. You could probably Google that. Okay. Mark Twain, one of the most famous writers in the United States, and also a very funny man, but very intelligent and very clever. He said, "I can live for 2 months on one good compliment." This next person is going to disagree with Mark Twain. This next person is somebody you've all heard of, and she says, no, they last more than 2 months. Mother Teresa says, "Kind words are short and easy to speak, but their echoes are truly endless." And in my book, when you open it up, sometimes authors use a quote to open the book, and it just says alone on that page. This is the quote that's on that book. Now, I'm bringing it up historically. The last person I'm going to quote is somebody who's still living. She's one of my heroes. If somebody asked me today, you can spend 3 hours with any living person in the world, who would it be? This is who it would be. Her name is Maya Angelou. She uses words like they're magic. She's unbelievable. I don't know if anybody's ever understood the words better than her, and this is a beautiful quotation from her. She says, "Words go into the body so they can cause us to be well and hopeful and happy and high energy and wondrous and funny and cheerful. Your words, if you choose them properly, can have that effect on somebody else and on you as well." Now remember yesterday I talked about toxic and nourishing. These are nourishing words. But you see those 3 dots at the end, that means this isn't the whole quote. So let me share with you what she reminded us our words can also do. They can cause us to be depressed. They can get into the body and cause us to be sullen and sour and depressed and finally sick, and words can do that. Those are the toxic words that we want to try to avoid. Okay, I talk a lot about choices. I'm a product of Jesuit education, and one of the things that they taught me when I was in college is that the greatest gift that God ever gave us was the free will, the power and the freedom and the ability to make choices. And I'm very much aware that every word that comes out of my mouth is a choice. So let me just, again, I'm just going to reinforce something I talked about yesterday. Remember I said toxic. Are they toxic? Is it like spraying poison in the atmosphere, or are they nourishing? Okay, I want to tell you a story about 2 friends. I was in my first year of teaching. I was 25 years old. I had just gotten my master's degree and my teaching credential, and I went to my first job. And my department chairman says, "We're going to assign a mentor to you." So the first friend that I'm going to talk about, I will call him the mentor. He had been at the school for 8 years. He was an outstanding teacher, one of the best I've ever seen, and I felt very honored to have him as my mentor because I'm in my first year with hardly any experience at all, and I'm going to learn from somebody who's really good. And so he watched me teach. He had me watch him teach. He had me watch some of the other good teachers in the school teach, and I really learned a lot. And then he and I would sit down a lot and talk. He would also watch me teach frequently, okay, so he could give me feedback. Now, there's something that I greatly admired about this man, my mentor. Whenever we talked and he gave me criticism about my own teaching, it was always gentle and it was always constructive. And I think that's something that we as teachers and parents need to learn to be able to do, to give criticism that is gentle and that is constructive. All right. At the end of my first year, my department chairman and my mentor asked me how I felt about continuing being mentored by him. And I said, fine, if you feel I still need more mentoring, then I'm all up for it. Well, he mentored me for a couple of years. And one of the things I began to notice when he mentored me, that he always remained gentle and constructive in his criticism. But he never once said anything good that I did. My principal was what we call old school. He never once said anything good that I did. And my department chairman was old school, and he did the same thing. He would observe me teach once every quarter, and then he would tell me all the things that I did wrong. The only positive feedback I ever got was at the end of the year I got rehired. So I must have been doing something right. But actually, that's a little bit wrong. I did get positive feedback from the students. They gave it to me all the time, and it kept me going, and I got a lot from their parents. I got a lot of nice notes from their parents and gifts at the end of the year, and so that made me feel I must be doing something right, but I didn't get any reinforcement from the professional people that were supervising me. And I think one of the things I mentioned yesterday, we all need feedback. Well, we need also positive feedback. I said catch kids doing things right. Well, when you're supervising people, catch them doing things right. So this criticism, even though it was gentle and constructive, it started beating me down. Because I got the feeling I'm never going to do anything that this guy is going to say, you really connected with the kids that day, or you did this, and it just constant. It was wearing me out. And then something magical happened. Like I say, it was always criticism. Okay. Number 2, the colleague and friend. I had been teaching for a few years, and a guy transferred from one high school in our district up to our high school. His name was Tim Hansel. I get choked up every time I talk about him because he was so unbelievable. And he died about 5 years ago. But he had the biggest influence on me. He and Tom Lacona, whose name you've heard of, are the two people that have had the biggest influence on me in my life. This man was an incredible teacher and an incredible friend. And I'll share with you the name that I gave him. And this is the highest compliment that I can ever give anybody. He was a life enhancer. Whenever you were in his presence, your life was enhanced. Your life was better. That's the kind of person he was. I was absolutely amazed by him. I was in awe of him. And his students loved him, and his colleagues loved him. He was like a magnet. He enhanced everybody's life. So what is it that was so special about Tim? Okay, here's what was so special about him. I remember we had been friends for quite a while. We were sitting down one day having lunch together, and I said, Tim, I've been friends with you now for 4 months, and I said, you know something? I keep asking myself, why is it so much fun to be around you, how you're different from other people? And I finally figured it out. I said, in the 4 months I've known you, I've never heard you once say a negative thing. He did not complain, he did not gossip, he did not swear, he did not whine. Everything that came out of his mouth was positive. And I said, I'm sure you're aware of that. And he said, yeah, I am. And I said, can you give me any background? How did this happen? And he said, well, I was really lucky, Hal. He said, I grew up with a mother and father that were both very positive. They were both very energetic. He said they were true to their faith. And he said, by the way, they were also funny. And he said, they taught me when I was young a verse from Ephesians. And it said, let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs. And he said, so I've lived since that time with a motto. And the motto is always have something good to say. He says you find the good in life and then you talk about it. Always have something good to say. Now I want to share one other thing with you about Tim. Our friendship continued through that whole school year, and we had been together now for about 9 months. And he and I usually ate lunch together because we wanted to stay out of the faculty lounge, right? Because that was toxic, and being with Tim was always nourishing. And he asked me a question one day that no one had ever asked me before, and no one has ever asked me since, but it was a magical question. We were talking about sports, and right in the middle of the conversation, he goes, and he points at me, and this is what he asked me. He says, "Do you know what I like the most about you?" As I say, nobody had ever asked me that question before. It kind of threw me off, and he was smiling, and I said, "No, what?" And he said, "Do you know what a great influence you have been on me as a teacher?" He said, "Do you know how much your students love you?" And then he went on and on. It wasn't just one thing, but he was telling me as a professional that I was a good teacher, that I was influencing kids in a very positive way. And I kind of felt that way because kids and parents had taught me that, had told me that, but I had never heard it from anybody in my professional ranks. And it was extremely powerful. We need that kind of feedback. Do you know what I like the most about you? Okay, now, after I had known, or during that year that I got to know Tim so well, I became increasingly aware of the power of what I call affirming language, positive feedback, catching people, catching kids doing things right, affirming them. Okay, and so I began to ask myself the question, can we teach people, particularly kids, can we teach them to build up rather than tear down? And so I decided I would start with one class. Now, I had a wonderful group of kids the last period of the day. They were 12th graders, seniors in high school, and they were in my psychology class. Now, they were there by choice. You don't have to take psychology. They chose to take psychology, and I loved these kids. We had great discussions, and I asked them one day, I said, "Do you think kids at this school use put-down language too much?" And they all said, "Oh, yeah, absolutely." He said, "We're teenagers. That's what we do. We put each other down." Okay, and they sometimes say, "Just kidding," but they're not kidding. They're getting their zingers in. Okay, and so I said, "Well, have you ever thought about using affirming language, about saying good things about people?" And one kid said, "Oh," he said, "boy, that would be awkward." Some other kid says, "Yeah, it would be embarrassing too." It would be awkward and embarrassing to find something good in another person and tell them, or to ask a person a question, "Do you know what I like most about you?" and then answer it. Awkward and embarrassing. I said, "Would it be awkward and embarrassing to put somebody down?" He said, "Oh no, that comes natural." And I said, "You know, at that time, you remember I showed you yesterday that we did 4 things in class. We shared good news. We said, 'I'm thankful for,' and then we did kind words." Well, at that time in my career, this is 1972, I was not doing the kind words yet. I was just doing good news and "I'm thankful for." So I talked to the kids. I said, "You guys like the way we start class?" And they said, "Oh, Mr. Urban, we love the way you start class. It's so great to share good news and to say things we're thankful for." And I said, "Well, I want to add a third choice." I said, "Your third choice is that you can look around the room, find somebody that you like, admire, appreciate, and tell that person why you like, admire, and appreciate them." I said, "Are you willing to try?" And again, a kid says, "Well, it'd really be awkward." And I said, "I know it will be, but sometimes when we learn new things, they're awkward at first and then we get better at them." I said, "All I'm asking is, are you willing to try? We'll start tomorrow." And they said yes, they would. So tomorrow came. And as it turned out, it was just a pure coincidence, I guess. I wasn't going to be in that class when tomorrow came. It was a Wednesday. And the reason is because in the afternoon, a good friend of mine had died, and his memorial service was that day in the afternoon. And so I got another teacher to cover my class. And and I went down to, I live in a town called Redwood City, and the town just south of it is called Menlo Park, and they had a very, very large Presbyterian church there. And this friend of mine, Bob, who died, he was very influential in the community. He was one of those guys that you're just in awe of. Everybody loved him. He was a fantastic human being. And I wanted to make sure that I went and honored his memory and his family. And so my wife and I went to the church. We had never been in that church before. And we went, we came in the church. It held, I think the church held about 1,200 people, and it had a long center aisle like here. And where we ended up sitting was like in the second row here, pretty close to the aisle. And so we're waiting for the service to start, and the pastor came out from a door over here, and he walked across the stage, not the stage, they don't call it the stage in the church, whatever it's called. He walked over, and there was one of those handheld microphones, and he took it off the podium, and then he came down here and he walked down the steps, and he got down within he was right in the congregation. And he said, good morning. He said, today is a celebration of life. He said, we are here to celebrate Bob's life. And he said, this is a joyous day. He said, there's a new person in heaven with God today. And he said, we are going to celebrate. And I'd never seen anybody in any religious ceremony for the dead start a service so upbeat like that. We are here to celebrate. We're going to celebrate a life. And I was assuming he probably talked to the family ahead of time and said, this is the way we were going to do it. And so it was very upbeat. And he came back up here, and the service was pretty short. He said there were 3 scripture readings that he based his talk on, and all 3 of them had the word joy in it. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Bible has the word joy in it hundreds and hundreds of times. And basically the theme was Bob had a lot of joy in his life, and he brought a lot of joy to other people's life. So that was the thing. And I thought this pastor was an incredible speaker. And I thought, man, if he didn't want to be a pastor, he could go on the circuit, the speaking circuit, and be one of those motivational guys. And he was just absolutely terrific. I was kind of mesmerized by him. And so anyway, time I'm not looking at my watch or anything, and time seems to be zipping by. And then all of a sudden, the service seems to be over. And I thought, that was quick. And I looked at my watch, and it had only been 25 minutes. I've never been to a church service in my life that was 25 minutes. But it wasn't over yet. I was going to wait and see what he was going to do. And so then he stopped. He took his microphone again. He walked down the steps, and he got down to the congregation again. And he says, now, he said, I left my part of the service short for a reason. He said, I want you to be part of this celebration. He said, now it was a cordless mic, and he said, would anybody like to share a memory about Bob before we leave today? Now there were about, out of the 1,200 seats, I think about 1,000 of them were full that day. And when he said, would anybody like to share a memory about Bob, I saw about 1,200 people go like this. Okay, you know what the number one fear in the life of human beings is? Talking in front of a large crowd of people. Okay, and so people went like this. Now, the guy sitting right next to me was apparently not intimidated by it, so he raised his hand, and the pastor handed him the mic. And this guy made this beautiful tribute to Bob. So he broke the ice, and now people around the church are raising their hand. And the pastor literally would run down the aisle. He'd say, pass the mic over. And these people say all these beautiful things about Bob. Now, I'm one of these guys that's always analyzing what's going on. I'm thinking about what my students said yesterday in class, that it would be awkward and embarrassing to say something nice about somebody else. And here are all these people doing it. Oh, and they said it would be even more awkward doing it in front of other people. Okay, now here are all of these people doing it in complete comfort, and they're in front of 1,000 people. And I start thinking about, well, why is it so easy for them to do this? And then I realized why it was so easy. Because the most important part of this was missing. What was missing? Bob. He wasn't there to hear it. And I asked myself a question: how many of these people ever told Bob those things when he was still alive? And then I answered my own question: none. It's safe now, he's dead. Okay, and it shouldn't be that way. And I thought, boy, I like to tell stories to my students, and I couldn't wait for school to start the next day so I could go tell my students about this story. And are you going to wait until your friends die before you say something nice to them? Tell them now. Okay. Back at school the next day. So I started class, my psychology class, I started by saying, how many of you guys remember what we were talking about on Tuesday that you said was awkward and embarrassing? And one kid raised his hand. He said, oh, I know, Mr. Urban, we were talking about that affirming language stuff. And I said, yeah, we were. I said, I want to tell you where I was yesterday. So I told them the whole story. And it was very fresh in my memory. So then when I completed the story, I said to them, I said, how many of those people do you think told Bob those things when he was still alive? And my kids all agreed with me. They were going like this: none. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. I said, do you think there's some strategy or technique that we can come up with that makes it easier to say kind and affirming things to people? I didn't expect them to have an answer because I didn't have one myself. I've never done this before with kids, and I'm trying to figure out a way. So it was what we call a rhetorical question. I don't know the answer. Let's brainstorm it. Well, I had a girl that sat in the back. Again, this is the spring of 1972. Her name was Nancy Custodio. And lo and behold, when I said, is there a strategy or a technique that we can come up with that will make it easy for us to affirm and build up other people? Did not expect an answer, and Nancy's in the back and she's going, oh, Mr. Urban. And I looked at her and I was really surprised, and she said, I've got an idea. And I thought, whoa, Nancy knows something I don't know. I said, Nancy, let's have your idea. And she says, okay, Mr. Urban. She says, you go out and get a casket. She said, and you bring it into the classroom. She said, and open the top half. She said, and we will take turns getting into it. And she said, I'll go first. And she said, I'll be in there like this. She said she held up a yellow highlighter and she said, Mr. Urban, you be the pastor. She said, and then you pass it around and you say, would anybody like to say something nice about Nancy before we put her in the ground? Okay, now, I asked for ideas, and she gave me one. I wasn't sure if she was kidding or serious, but I had asked for ideas, and I didn't want to dismiss her idea. But at the same time, I'm sure you can understand this, I didn't want a casket anywhere near my class. So I'm going to try to get out of this as gracefully as I can. And on that day, in the spring of 1972, I said the stupidest thing that I have ever said in 36 years of teaching. I said, oh, Nancy, I said, that's a great idea. The only problem is I just don't know where we would get a casket. Now, the reason it was stupid is because teenagers love a challenge. And as soon as I said that, I figured next day when I come in, there's going to be 4 caskets outside my classroom. So then I realized my statement was even dumber than it appeared at first. Okay, Nancy was in the back, and sitting right here, this close to me, was one of her classmates. His name was Walt Burglar, Bergler, Walt Burglar. Guess what Walt's dad did for a living? Boy, you are smart. He was a mortician. And as soon as I said I don't know where we'd get a casket, I look at Walt and I thought, oh no, how bad can this get? And so I look at him, and he's a very, what we call, laid-back kid. And he looks at me, and he goes, I said, Walt, he said, Mr. Urban, that won't be a problem. He said, which model do you want? Okay. So then we had a discussion about that, and then finally I said, you know, I think we'd have all kinds of problems, and can we do it without any props? So we all agreed that we would try to do it without any props. And I'll give the kids credit. You know, we started that day. Was it awkward and embarrassing? Yes, it was. It's important for me to say that. The older the kids are, if you start with them when they're in high school, it's going to be more difficult. You start with them when they're really young and you keep doing it, it's going to be a lot easier. But kids need to learn to use, again, I say it over and over, language that builds up instead of language that tears down. Okay, let me share something else. Anyway, I was really proud of those kids. I'll never forget them because they were the ones that were the pioneers of this, and they started it, and they got better and better and better as we went along. Okay, I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I shared this story for the first time. And an English teacher came up to me afterwards and she said, Hal, I have an anonymous quotation. I don't know who said it, but it fits perfectly with your story. A single rose is of greater value to the living than an entire wreath is to the dead. Okay? Give a living person a rose rather than waiting till the person dies and take a whole wreath of roses to the funeral. So, okay, right. Let me tell you what I wrote on the plane coming home that night. A single kind word is of greater value to the living than hundreds of kind words at that person's memorial service. If you know somebody that's deserving of a kind word, give it to them now. Very simple, okay? Once isn't enough. I want to share with you a fairly long quotation from a book that I really like. What other people need from us on an ongoing basis is to know they are cared for, that their good deeds inspire gratitude, and that others love them. It's that simple. And just because they hear such sentiments on Monday doesn't mean that they won't need to hear them again on Tuesday. This is the primary reason why words that heal and inspire must be repeated again and again. You don't just say it once. Rabbi Joseph Telushkin wrote a book called Words Can Hurt, Words Can Heal. Words can be toxic, words can be nourishing. Okay, I alluded to this briefly yesterday, and I just want to reinforce it today. A simple affirmation assignment. I gave my students a piece of paper. It was a homework assignment. Up at the top it said affirmation assignment verbal. I said, tell 3 people, make 3 people feel good, 3 people that you appreciate. And I had a quote from Maya Angelou, the same one that I shared with you earlier. And they were to write down the name of the person. They were to write down your relationship to the person, what you said. You remember this from yesterday? What you said and what the response was. And they went out and did that, and they came back and they said, oh, I made so-and-so cry. Not tears of sadness, tears of joy. You know, some of these kids told their parents that they loved and appreciated them, which they never did. And one of the girls said, my mother just broke down and cried. And she said, sometimes I wonder if you and your father ever do appreciate me. And that was so nice to hear. And I got a lot of feedback from not only the kids that did the assignment, And they said, boy, that's so powerful. And they also said, you know, I made somebody else feel really good. And you know what it did to me? It made me feel good too. And I said, that's called win-win. All right? Tell 3 people why you appreciate them. It's not that hard, but we don't do it very often. You can do it like Tim Hansel did. He said, Lois, a little reminder. Okay, I only have 1 more hour, so okay, no, 10 minutes and I'll be out of here. Tell 3 people why you appreciate them. Advice from 2 experts. I can be very brief on this. The first one is Zig Ziglar. Zig Ziglar was one of my favorite people for a long time. He wrote a lot of great books, and he was a very entertaining and upbeat message. He just died a year ago. But he says, be a good finder. He said, we find what we're looking for. Be a good finder. Well, find the good in life and find the good in other people. Now, my friend Tim Hansel that I talked about earlier, he took this one step farther. He was indeed a good finder. He always found the good, but he always talked about it also. As soon as he found the good, he would tell people what he found in them. And that's why he was a life enhancer. Okay, a book written in 1932 by Dale Carnegie called How to Win Friends and Influence People. He said, give the other person a good reputation to live up to. You know how you do that? You catch somebody doing something right and you tell them that they now have a reputation with you. And it's a good reputation. They're going to keep doing those things because it's called positive reinforcement. Okay, reminder as we close up here. Every word that comes out of your mouth and my mouth is a choice. They can be toxic. They can be nourishing. I want to repeat this because this is the heart of my message. Words have the power to destroy or heal. When words are both true and kind, they can change our world. Tim Hansel changed my world. And you can change somebody else's world, including your own. The power of words. This was an accidental discovery. I was in a friend's warehouse, and he had this great big poem about the power of words on the wall, on a poster. And down at the bottom it said, author unknown. I don't know how anybody can write something so beautiful and not want to put your name on it. But let me share it with you. A careless word can kindle strife. A cruel word may wreck a life. A bitter word may hate and still. A brutal word may spite and kill. Toxic. But that's not the whole poem. Here's the rest of it. A gracious word may smooth the way. A joyous word may light the day. A timely word may lessen stress. A loving word may heal and bless. Fantastic poem. Okay, now, I'm going to leave you with 3 assignments. Response? Okay. Oh, boy. This will be a wonderful learning experience. All right. Here's the first one. Number 1. Go 24 hours. It is 11:45. You're going to go until 11:45 tomorrow. You're going to go 24 hours without complaining. You are not going to complain about anything. That means you can't say anything bad about me today. Okay, you have to wait till tomorrow. Okay, that's assignment number 1. And by the way, I started giving this assignment to my kids. And I'm not exaggerating. It took 23 years before I got a kid that could do it. She had the perfect name, Grace. And that's the truth. Okay. Assignment number 2. Now do them one at a time. I don't want to overwhelm you. Number 2, go 24 hours without gossip. If you go 24 hours without complaining, you will go 24 hours without whining, because whining is complaining. Okay, that's number 2. Number 3, Who are the 3 people you most appreciate? I'll bet you can answer that in seconds. Besides me, who are the other 2? Okay. Oh no, besides me and Dr. Jones, who's the other 1? Okay. Who are the 3 people you most appreciate? Here's the assignment. Tell them this week. Okay? Those are your 3 assignments. Great assignments, right? Yes. Okay. Heal and bless someone with your words today and every day. This has been an incredible experience for both Dr. Jones and myself. I cannot believe what loving people you are. Thank you. God bless you for what you do. I hope you become the best teachers in the world. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Very much.
Mr. Urban.